In 2023, Sony is poised to release a bunch of new cameras. And that's what this video is about. It's about buying new cameras, and really it's about you getting the most value for your hard-earned money. And it's my hope that these two clips will allow me to illustrate image value. In other words, the image that the camera you buy is able to produce and just how much it costs to produce that image. Image value. That, and to also convey the idea of diminishing returns, which is a really big deal anytime we buy any kind of tech gadgets, specifically a camera. Now, one of these clips was filmed using a Sony full-frame camera costing well over $4,800. The other clip also filmed on a Sony camera, however, the camera costs less than $1,000. And as I conducted these tests, I found it really interesting how each of these cameras handled the light and the color differently, even though that I filmed in pretty much the same settings. 4K 24 frames per second, Kelvin value white balance of 5600, and the same picture profiles, and I got this strange result, so I went back and I ran the test again without any picture profiles in both cameras and pretty much got a very similar setting. However, I didn't like the colors as much without my custom picture profiles. And in the rest of this video, I'll be sharing additional video footage filmed at 4K from both cameras, the high-end full-frame camera and the budget option. And the value we get when we buy a camera is really broken up into a few groups, starting with the sensor. The factors include sensor size. Are we talking about a 1-inch sensor, a crop sensor, or APS-C sensor, or full frame? And even more important is, when was the sensor developed for the camera you're thinking about buying? For example, this is the Sony a6300. It was released in September of 2016, and I filmed a lot of great videos with this camera because it produces amazing 4K footage. And Sony has released countless cameras that are based on the sensor inside the a6300, including the a64, a65, a6600 camera, which, by the way, that camera, the a6600, is still available today and retails for around $1,300. And here's where it gets a bit interesting. Check it out. Recently, Sony released one of the most popular cameras called the ZV-E1, and guess what sensor it was based on? Yeah, the a6600, a camera that was released and a sensor that was released again in 2016. But the ZV-E1 retailed for around $800. Amazing. And thus, if you were to buy a ZV-E1, you would get so much value when we talk about image value. Which brings us to some of the newer cameras being released in days, like the ZV-E1 based on this little camera. Well, I figured let's set up the vlogging kind of situation. Because if you're thinking about picking up the new ZV camera, well, one of the things to consider is image stabilization. So let's talk more about that image stabilization in regards to the ZV-E1. When you vlog, you have to record clips multiple times. Fair warning. Turns out this new Sigma lens wasn't tracking and focusing on my eyes, which are hidden by the sunglasses, but I digress. This is a stabilization test right now, and the fact that I'm using the A7S III is great because, well, the new ZV-E1 is going to be based on that same chip. However, it's going to be less expensive. You see, the Sony A7S III retailed for about $3,400 when it launched. Here's another test, dynamic range. It's pretty darn good in the Sony a7S III and probably will be just as good in the ZV-E1. And currently I'm vlogging with active stabilization. There's actually about 3 modes. One is no stabilization at all. Number 2 is IBIS, which is optical image stabilization. The sensor is stabilized. And then the third is active, which is digital. That's baked into the software, and the ZV-E1 will most certainly have active. What's really going to be interesting is just how much of a crop the ZV-E1 has. The Sony a7S III, when active stabilization is engaged, only has about a 10% crop. Not too bad at all. Currently I'm filming on a 16mm lens, and I've got active stabilization on, and you can see nice and wide. And the stabilization is pretty good. Not bad at all. And the lens is still tracking me. Good job, not Sony, Sigma. So let's do a little bit of a stabilization test. Right now I'm simply holding the camera. There's no stabilization engaged. And this is basically the kind of stabilization you're going to get with no stabilization engaged. No stabilization walking. Let's turn on the IBIS, or the first level of stabilization. This is called standard stabilization, and again, it's optical. This is really fantastic as well when you're shooting photos in low light, or anytime you just want that sharp image. A stabilized camera is going to result in sharper images and video. So now I have active stabilization engaged, kind of just doing a little gentle walk, not trying too hard. This is about the kind of stabilization that you get with the a7S III with both stabilization modes engaged. And again, another dynamic range test. One of the things that's really great about the sensor combination, sensor and processor, is the dynamic range is incredible on this camera. And there's one more thing that you want to consider. So while it's true the more money we spend, the more likely we're able to capture a great photo or some great B-roll, the fact of the matter is that the image sensors in these Sony cameras, they really haven't changed a whole lot over the last few years. The technology is kind of at a peak right now. Now I believe we'll reach the next level, but we're not there right now. And that means cameras based on slightly older tech are often an incredible value, which brings me to the ZV-E1 full frame camera based on, again, the Sony a7S III that's being released in days. Another full frame camera that's probably going to be released soon is the Sony A9. Incredible photo camera for wildlife shooters. Another really great example is the Sony a7R5. What's interesting is this camera has some killer new features, like 8 stops of image stabilization based on a stabilized sensor. Amazing. No other camera that's been released by Sony has 8 stops of image stabilization. And that really matters if you're really doing a lot of video or if you're doing a long exposure photo. However, you're really going to pay a premium for that brand new camera, which retails for close to $4,000 body only. And it's also got a class-leading articulating screen. It is the very best screen, whether you're shooting photos or video, whether you're shooting yourself, it doesn't matter. It is by far the best articulating screen, period. And this is the Sony A1, and sadly, it doesn't have a flip screen. So it's great for photos, but this is really a hybrid camera. And if the Sony A2 has that screen, it would be better for photographers or video creators. And I'm sure that feature is going to trickle down because that's how it works in any tech company. New features drive the innovation, but then they trickle down to the masses and we get a better value. So just which of those clips at the beginning of this video was taken with the Sony a7S III with a G Master 24mm lens? Well, this clip right here. And the other clip was taken with the Sony ZV-E1, an incredible video camera capable of 4K and 24 or 30 frames, incredible image stabilization. In fact, the image stabilization is superior to the ZV-E10, which you might think, well, the ZV-E10 is better because it's interchangeable lens. But if you never change your lens, is it really a better camera? And again, this takes me really back to really thinking about what you want to shoot and what matters to you. If you're moving away from a phone to a camera, well then something like the ZV-E1 or RX100 is a great buy, just like this crop sensor camera that came out a few years ago. Really, it's about understanding how old the tech is and what you need moving forward. Hope you found this particular video to be helpful. I'll see you on the next one. You dig?